That morning in Pinehollow felt wrong the moment the sun rose. Too quiet, too still, the kind of stillness that tells a parent something is about to break. Andrew had argued with Ethan an hour earlier. One sharp word and the boy ran into the woods, but it was Laura who felt the silence change first. A mother always does. She stepped outside, called his name. Nothing. Then came a single bark from deep in the trees. Ranger. Then Blitz. Not playful barks, warning barks, the kind that mean danger. In that moment, both parents knew their son wasn't just missing, he was trapped, and time was already running out. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and your pet's name in the comments below. The storm had rolled through Pinehollow, Colorado, just before dawn, leaving the small mountain town wrapped in a thin veil of mist. Pine needles still dripped from last night's rain, and low clouds clung to the ridgelines like a heavy, unfinished thought. For a brief moment, the forest felt too quiet, too expectant, as though every tree were holding its breath. 9-year-old Ethan Walker, a thin, sharp-eyed boy with a mop of copper-brown hair and a habit of wandering off trail, had disappeared somewhere inside that silence. Andrew Walker, Ethan's father, stood at the edge of the forest, his breathing ragged, rainwater and sweat mixing at his temples despite the cold air. Andrew was a man in his mid-30s, tall, broad-shouldered from a lifetime of ranger work, but today he looked smaller than usual, shrunk by fear. His short brown beard was uneven, the result of restless nights and too many skipped mornings. He had always been a decisive, grounded person, the type others relied on in emergencies. But ever since last year's accident, a climbing incident that cost him his best friend, Andrew carried quiet guilt like an invisible backpack. It made him stricter at home, especially with Ethan, who shared his adventurous streak. 2 hours earlier, they had argued, a stupid argument about curfews and climbing rocks, and "you don't listen when I'm trying to keep you safe." Ethan had run into the woods before Andrew could take the words back. Now, with the storm gone, the guilt was back, this time threatening to drown him. Beside him, Laura Walker, Ethan's mother, wrapped her arms around herself as if holding her body together. Laura was a woman with soft hazel eyes and hair the color of autumn wheat, but the glow she used to carry had dimmed. After a traumatic miscarriage the year before, she'd slipped into depression, slow at first, then a quiet freefall. Therapy helped, but she still walked through the world as if made of thin glass. Today, all that fragile control was shattering. Her voice trembled, barely audible. "Andrew, we should have gone after him sooner." Andrew didn't respond. He couldn't. His throat had closed. At their feet stood the family's 2 canine German shepherds. Ranger, 6 years old, stood firm like carved stone. A seasoned search and rescue canine, trained through multiple deployments, Ranger's coat was a rich sable pattern, his ears proudly erect. Calm eyes, deep amber and steady, scanned the ground with practiced focus. Ranger was disciplined, methodical, the kind of dog who measured his breaths and never wasted movement. Beside him was Blitz, 3 years old, smaller, sleeker, with a dark blanket saddle and bright, intelligent eyes. Blitz was all instincts and quick reactions, sometimes too quick. She was the type to follow a scent before being asked, to leap off a log rather than walk around it, to trust her intuition even when others didn't. Veterinarians called her reactive. Trainers called her a challenge. Ethan called her the brave one. Today, Blitz paced anxiously, nose low, tail stiff, picking up something the humans couldn't, Ranger looked toward the tree line, then up at Andrew, as if saying, "We start now." Blitz barked sharply, then broke into a run. Andrew's breath hitched. "She has something! Go, girl, go!" The two dogs shot into the forest, muscles coiled and powerful beneath their coats. Andrew and Laura stumbled after them, branches whipping at their arms as they pushed through undergrowth still soaked from the storm. The deeper they went, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no squirrels, no wind through branches. Just dripping water and the pounding of two human hearts. Ranger suddenly stopped, head raised, ears forward, body stiff. Blitz circled a patch of disturbed soil, a faint trail of boots too small to be an adult's. Ethan's boots. Laura's breath broke into a sob. Ranger dipped his nose closer, inhaled, then looked up and let out a low, controlled bark. The signal for confirmed scent. Andrew whispered, "Good boy, good boy," though his voice cracked on the second repetition. Blitz was already pulling north, deeper into the forest. They followed the trail for nearly 15 minutes, though every second tugged at Laura like a hook lodged straight into her spine. The ground sloped downward toward the old forestry sector, long abandoned, halfway reclaimed by moss and rot. Most locals didn't come here. Too many sinkholes, too many unstable outbuildings. Andrew had explicitly told Ethan never to come this way. Ranger slowed as the scent grew stronger. Blitz whined, a sharp high note that made Laura's knees weaken. Then they saw it. The entrance to an old timber refuge bunker, a concrete and steel door built decades ago for fire crews, was half buried under a fresh mudslide. Wet earth, broken roots, and crushed shrubs formed a thick plug over the doorway. Only a sliver of the metal frame was visible. Ranger pawed at the mud. Blitz barked again, louder and more frantic. Andrew rushed forward, hands shaking as he scraped at the dirt. "Ethan!" he shouted into the cracks. "Ethan, buddy, are you in there?" Silence. Then, faint, impossibly faint. A hollow metallic bang. Laura gasped. "That's him! Andrew, that's him!" Blitz lowered her head and shoved her snout into the narrow gap, trying to worm her way inside. Ranger pressed an ear to the ground, body motionless. His tail rose. He barked once, short, sharp. Ethan, alive. But the bunker entrance was completely blocked. Even Ranger couldn't dig quickly enough. The mud had compacted into something like wet cement. Andrew clawed at the earth until his nails tore. Laura pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. "No signal. Andrew, I can't get anyone." "Why isn't there any signal?" He forced himself to breathe. Think. Focus. "Ranger," he commanded hoarsely. "Track alternate. Access." The old K9 pivoted immediately. He sniffed the ground, moving in slow arcs. Blitz followed but zigzagged ahead, testing the air. Ranger veered toward the slope, where runoff from the storm had carved new channels into the soil. Blitz suddenly froze. Her whole body stiffened, ears back, head tilted. She let out a low growl, not aggressive, but worried. Then she ran downhill. "Blitz, wait!" Andrew shouted. But she didn't wait. She bolted toward an area where the ground sagged unnaturally, forming a shallow depression. Ranger trotted close behind, more cautious but attentive. Andrew and Laura caught up moments later, breathless. "What is this?" Laura murmured. Andrew crouched. The soil was loose, recently disturbed, and when he pressed his hand on it, he felt something unlike normal earth. A faint vibration. Ranger felt it too. He lowered his head and let out a soft, rumbling alarm bark. Laura whispered, terrified, "Andrew, the ground is hollow." The rain-softened soil under their feet seemed to dip, almost imperceptibly. Andrew stood, backing away. This whole area, I didn't think the old tunnels went this far. Blitz paced in a tight circle, nose to the wind, then barked directly toward the depression, a signal she had only used once before during training. Victim directly below. Laura covered her mouth. Ethan, he's under there. At that moment, the forest's eerie silence finally broke. A distant siren echoed through the ravine, the rescue team arriving at last. But Ranger wasn't waiting. He returned to the bunker entrance, barking sharply at Andrew as if demanding immediate action. Blitz stayed at the depression, pacing, whining, tail low, torn between 2 points of danger. Laura whispered, "They're split because Ethan might be trapped between both." Andrew felt the weight of it crush his chest. Ethan below, blocked entrance above, unstable ground everywhere. He sank to his knees. "Ethan, God, please hold on." Ranger pressed his head against Andrew's arm, steady, reassuring, grounding. Blitz nudged Laura's hand with an urgent whimper, urging her not to collapse into panic. The forest felt heavier than ever now, the air colder, the stakes sharper. Before the rescue crew even reached them, one truth was clear. The 2 dogs would not wait for humans to save Ethan, and neither parent could deny it. Ranger and Blitz had already begun the real rescue. Ranger was the first to move after the initial shock settled over the forest floor. The old K9 stepped toward the shallow depression, nose almost touching the damp soil. His breaths became measured, controlled, intentional, sniffing for patterns invisible to human senses. The faint vibration that had rippled under Andrew's hand in Chapter 1 was now pulsing more clearly beneath Ranger's paws, like a heartbeat muffled under layers of earth and stone. Blitz circled back to the same spot, her movements quick and jerky as she tried to locate the strongest point of the signal. Her ears flattened as she barked sharply at the ground, a relentless burst of sound that echoed through the trees. She scraped furiously at the soil with her front paws, sending wet dirt flying behind her. Andrew's voice cracked. "She's got something. It's God, Ranger, is he right there?" Laura knelt beside Blitz, despite the mud soaking into her jeans. Her trembling hand hovered over Blitz's back, not quite touching, but seeking strength from the dog's certainty. "Ethan, baby, if you can hear us, just keep making noise," she whispered. As if responding, a faint metallic clang rose from the earth. Weak, muffled, but unmistakably human. Laura gasped and nearly collapsed forward. Andrew caught her, steadying her with an arm that shook as much as hers. Ranger's ears shot up. He barked once, an urgent, sharp signal that he had confirmed the sound. Ranger then moved several steps uphill, nose tracing the air, and lowered his head toward a small crack where the mudslide hadn't fully sealed the old bunker system. The crack was narrow, barely wide enough for a hand, but Ranger's body stiffened. He pawed gently at the edge, then pressed his ear against it. There was another clang, then a second, a steady rhythm, 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. Andrew whispered, "He's signaling. He's actually signaling." Blitz squeezed her body against the crack, trying to force herself inside. Her ribs compressed, her legs trembling with effort. She pushed until stones shifted dangerously around her shoulders. Andrew lunged forward and grabbed her collar. "Blitz, no! You'll get stuck!" Blitz snarled, but not at him. Her teeth snapped toward the stone edge, not in aggression, but urgency. She wriggled backward, and as she did, a faint hiss slipped from the crevice, so subtle that only Ranger reacted. The old dog jerked his head toward the crack and growled low, warning. Andrew leaned close and felt the sting in his nose. Oh no. Laura, that's gas. Bad air. Laura's eyes widened. Ethan can't breathe that for long. Blitz gave a sharp, distressed bark, pacing wildly. Ranger planted himself at the crack and barked 3 times in the direction of the ridge. Another trained signal. Severe hazard detected. Immediate intervention required. As Andrew scrambled to stand, the whine of an engine echoed down the trail. A white pickup truck appeared between the pines, sliding slightly in the soft mud before stopping. The door flew open and a man in his early 40s jogged out. Caleb Morton. Caleb was a compact man with dense, muscular shoulders and the type of rigid posture common among people who'd spent their lives on construction sites. His hair was iron gray despite his age, cut short, his beard trimmed but mismatched, patchy in places. His eyes were sharp slate blue, but there was something constantly fidgeting beneath them, a strain like unresolved pressure. Caleb had a reputation around Pinehollow as confident, good at seismology and structural assessments, but also impatient, quick-tempered, and known to cut corners when the city's bureaucracy annoyed him. He raised a hand as he approached. "Andrew, Laura, I heard your son's missing. Jesus, in this area, this section's supposed to be stable." His voice cracked, as if betraying more panic than concern. These caverns shouldn't be active anymore. Ranger immediately stepped between Caleb and the crack in the earth, hackles rising. Blitz joined him, her body angled defensively. Caleb stopped dead. "Whoa, hey, what's gotten into them? They know me." Andrew narrowed his eyes. "Why are you here, Caleb?" Caleb gestured helplessly. "Sheriff called me, said you needed geological evaluation. I came as fast as I could. This whole ridge is risky after the storm." Blitz barked, low and warning. Caleb flinched. Laura watched him with trembling suspicion. "You said this place was safe. Months ago, when the town was talking about expanding the cabin trail." Caleb swallowed. The reports were accurate, based on what we saw then. If something shifted underground, it wasn't. Another metallic bang from below cut him off. Laura cried out, falling to her knees beside Ranger. "Ethan, we hear you! We're right here!" Ranger pressed against her, a grounding presence. Blitz began to dig again, but Ranger barked sharply, calling her off. She stopped reluctantly. Andrew turned to Caleb. "If you know anything about this land, you'd better speak up now." Caleb looked shaken, his eyes darting between the collapsing soil and the 2 K9s. There used to be a vent shaft somewhere, an old forestry access that connected to the main bunker. If it's still partially open, it could be how sound is carrying up. "Where?" Andrew demanded. Caleb pointed uphill toward a rocky slope covered in moss and storm debris. "Somewhere up there, but it's too unstable. No one should climb that." Blitz immediately ran uphill. "Blitz! No!" Andrew shouted, but she ignored him, nose low, tail high. Ranger followed seconds later, glancing back at Andrew as if saying, "You asked, we follow." Andrew and Laura scrambled after them, with Caleb reluctantly trailing behind. The slope was slick and uneven, with sections where the storm had uprooted trees, leaving raw root systems exposed like broken ribs in the earth. Blitz climbed with the agility of a mountain goat, weaving between the jagged branches. Ranger moved slower, but with precision, testing each section before climbing. Halfway up, Blitz stopped at a cluster of boulders pinned against the hillside. She shoved her muzzle between them and inhaled sharply. Then she backed out abruptly, coughing. Andrew reached her and smelled it too. Metallic, sour, wrong. "Gas pockets," Caleb said breathlessly. "If the bunker's compromised, the air down there could be unbreathable." Laura pressed her fist to her mouth. "He won't last long," Blitz barked. But this bark was different than before. Rapid, panicked, almost angry. She clawed at the stone, trying to widen the gap. Andrew tried to help, pulling smaller stones aside. Ranger stepped forward and tilted his head, listening. His ears twitched. Then he struck the ground lightly with his paw. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps. The exact rhythm Ethan had tapped. He was close, very close. Blitz dug frantically, but as she forced her head into the gap, a sharp crack splintered through the rock. A slab shifted downward, pinning her shoulder. She yelped. "Blitz!" Andrew grabbed her harness and heaved backward with all his strength. The rock scraped her fur, but she pulled free, stumbling into his arms. Ranger shoved his shoulder against her protectively. Caleb rushed forward, face pale. "That whole outcrop is unstable. You keep digging, the whole slope might collapse." Andrew glared at him. "And if we don't, my son dies." Caleb hesitated. Then his jaw clenched. "There's another way to locate the vent. A topographical echo test, if I can access the right equipment." Laura's voice sharpened with raw fear. "You'd better get it." Caleb nodded, suddenly serious. "I'll get what I can from my truck." He ran downhill. But Ranger didn't wait. He tapped the ground again. 3, pause, 2. A faint echo responded from below. Blitz, bruised but still determined, placed her body against Ranger's side, both of them listening to Ethan's rhythmic tapping traveling through a vent no wider than a fist. Andrew's voice shook. "He's right under us." Laura leaned into him, tears shining in her eyes. "We're coming, baby. Hold on." The forest around them seemed to lean closer, the wind dying completely as if the world itself was listening. And Ranger and Blitz, bruised, muddy, and unyielding, held their positions on the unstable slope. 2 guardians standing above the thin veil of earth, separating them from the boy they refused to lose. The rescue hadn't begun, but the call from beneath the earth had been heard, and Ranger and Blitz were already answering. The rescue team reached the hillside minutes after Caleb sprinted down to fetch his equipment, their flashing lights cutting through the gray morning haze. The vehicles stopped abruptly near the slope, tires skidding over soft mud. Doors slammed, voices rose, and within seconds the tranquil silence of Pinehollow forest had been replaced by coordinated urgency. At the front of the group was Sheriff Mira Dalton, a woman in her early 50s with a square jaw and steel-gray hair cropped close to her head. She carried the presence of someone who had weathered disaster before, calm under pressure, sharp-eyed, and famously unshakable. Mira stood tall and straight-backed, despite a subtle limp from an old avalanche rescue years ago. People trusted her because she rarely reacted emotionally, but there was an unmistakable softness in her gaze whenever children were involved. Ethan's disappearance carved a tight line across her brow. She took in the chaos on the hillside, the disturbed soil, the 2 frantic K9s, Andrew and Laura covered in mud and fear. "Show me," she said simply. Ranger and Blitz immediately responded, Blitz darting up the slope ahead to the cluster of rocks where she had been trapped moments earlier. Ranger followed with slower, more deliberate movements, occasionally glancing back to make sure the humans were keeping up. The rescue team spread out with practiced efficiency. Among them was Deputy Cole Ramirez, a lean man in his late 20s with warm brown skin and a buzz cut. Cole was relatively new to Pinehollow, having transferred from Denver after burning out from big city emergencies. He was soft-spoken but observant, and though he rarely smiled, he had a gentle steadiness that made people feel safe. He carried a coil of rope over his shoulder and a portable ventilation monitor in his hand. Cole whistled low as he approached the unstable slope. "Looks rough," he muttered. "This limestone's practically hollow." Mira nodded grimly. "It's the old forestry network. Half of it was mapped before we were born." Blitz barked sharply at the gap between the rocks, the same spot where she'd smelled gas pockets. Mira crouched beside her, touching the stones carefully. "That's the vent you heard him through," Andrew answered, his voice cracking. "Yes, he tapped 3-2, Ranger confirmed." Ranger nudged Mira's hand, pushing it away from the shifting stone. His hackles rose slightly, and he looked toward a second path, an incline leading to a shadowed section of cliffside 30 yards away. Blitz whined, jogged to Ranger's side, then ran ahead toward the darker portion of the rock wall. She picked up speed, tail stiff, ears forward, and pawed at what looked like a narrow opening hidden behind a fallen pine trunk. Cole rushed toward her and pulled away the branches. "Sheriff, you need to see this." Mira stepped forward. Behind the debris, a second entrance, partially concealed by storm runoff and tree roots, led down into darkness. It was barely wide enough for a single rescuer to squeeze through, but it looked more stable than the collapsed main entrance. Blitz pawed at the mouth of the cave, barking in short, urgent bursts. Ranger approached slowly, lowered his head, and inhaled the cool breath of air rising from within. He whined, deep, aching, and pressed one paw against the stone floor. His signal was unmistakable. Ethan was directly below. Mira exhaled shakily. "All right, we'll use this one." The rescue team unloaded equipment: ropes, structural supports, oxygen tanks. Cole began assembling the portable fan unit to blow fresh air down the shaft. Caleb Morton finally returned, wheezing slightly from the uphill sprint. He carried a battered metal case and tried to step close, but Ranger blocked him again, growling low. Mira raised a hand. "Morton, stay back." Caleb stiffened. "I'm here to help." "You'll help when I say so," she snapped, her patience thinning. "Right now, my dogs are more reliable." Caleb's jaw clenched. He stepped aside, but the flicker of guilt in his eyes didn't go unnoticed. Mira turned to Cole. "Get the fiber optic camera set. If the boy's directly below, we need eyes." On it. Cole knelt beside the shaft, unwinding the flexible camera cable. Andrew paced behind them, hands shaking. Laura sat on a fallen log, staring at her muddy boots, her shoulders trembling. Blitz nudged her gently, resting her head on Laura's knee. Laura stroked the dog's fur with a broken whisper. "Bring him back." When the camera light flickered to life, Cole lowered it into the shaft. The screen on the small monitor glowed pale blue, showing jagged walls and falling dust. Then slowly, the image widened into a cramped underground chamber. Old support beams sagging, debris scattered across the floor. Ethan was there, pressed against a concrete wall, pale, exhausted, and trembling. His small hand hit the wall again, 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, before he let it fall weakly to his lap. His left wrist looked swollen, possibly fractured, and his lips were cracked from dehydration. The lantern he'd been carrying had shattered, leaving him in near darkness. Laura choked on a sob. "Oh God, Ethan!" Cole zoomed the camera closer. "He's alive. He's conscious. Barely. He's breathing shallow. CO2 levels are probably rising down there." Mira's expression hardened. "We need to ventilate the chamber immediately, and we need to get someone down." Before she finished, Ranger stiffened. He stepped away from the group toward a patch of ground just a few feet upslope. His paws sank slightly into the dirt. The soil shuddered. Not from Ethan's tapping. This was heavier, slower, a shifting mass beneath the soil. Ranger let out a sharp, forceful bark. Cole's head snapped up. Movement under the hillside. Slope instability. Before Mira could issue an order, a crack zigzagged across the slope, splitting the earth with a sickening groan. Andrew stared in horror. It's going to slide. Everyone back, Mira shouted. The team scrambled downslope. Blitz grabbed Ranger's scruff and pulled him back with surprising strength as several 100 pounds of loose soil sloughed off, tumbling down the incline. Dust billowed into the air, and rocks clattered sharply against each other. The second entrance held, but barely. When the dust settled, Cole checked the hillside. That was just a partial slough. If we take too long, the next one could bury the entrance entirely. Mira cursed under her breath, then turned to Andrew. We have to move now. Andrew stood stiff, pale, but focused. I'm going down. I can fit through that shaft. Mira shook her head. Not without stabilization. If you shift one wrong stone, and if we wait, Andrew said quietly, my son suffocates. His eyes burned with fear and resolve. Laura looked up at him, tears streaking her muddy face. Andrew! Ranger stepped to Andrew's side, pressing his head firmly against Andrew's leg. Blitz mirrored him, nudging his hand. Both dogs stood like silent, unwavering pillars, two living signals pointing toward the only choice left. Cole, watching the exchange, swallowed hard. Sheriff, I'll go with him. We'll anchor the ropes and descend carefully. If anything shifts, I'll be ready. Mira looked between them, the father ready to risk his life, the loyal deputy, the two unyielding dogs, and the faint, steady tapping of a child fighting to stay awake. She nodded once. Prep the lines. As the rescuers worked, Andrew pulled a battered, folded map from his pack. He had grabbed it in desperation while sprinting to the forest earlier, a relic from his father's days as Pinehollow's senior ranger. The paper was worn soft, creased with age. On its faded surface, he traced the labyrinth of underground tunnels. His finger trembled as it hovered over the hollowed-out section beneath them. This area, he whispered. My dad said the ground here was dangerous. He told the town council 20 years ago. But in the modern map, printed brightly and delivered by Morton's company, this entire warning zone was gone. Caleb stiffened. That map is outdated. Outdated, Andrew repeated bitterly. Or inconvenient, Mira's eyes narrowed. We're not having this conversation now, but we will. Blitz barked, urgent and sharp. Time was running out. Cole secured the final rope. Andrew strapped into the harness. Ranger and Blitz stood at the entrance, paws planted on either side, as if guarding the passage. Mira gave the order. Begin descent. And the rescue, hazardous, improvised, and fueled by desperation, finally began. The drill's metallic whine cut through the forest like a blade, echoing across the ravine and vibrating through the limestone ridge. Rescue workers had set up support beams and floodlights around the secondary entrance, turning the shadowed slope into a chaotic hive of motion. Dust swirled in the cold air, ropes trembled with every shift of the ground, and beneath it all, Ethan's faint tapping had grown weaker, slower, barely audible. Blitz stayed closest to the newly drilled opening. Every few seconds she pressed her nose toward the thin stream of stale air rising from the shaft. Something in that air made her whine. Fear, urgency, grief all tangled together. She could smell Ethan's weakness now the way trained K9s smelled terminal vitals, something deeper than injury. She paced, restless, her paws dark with mud and limestone dust. Ranger kept guard beside her, though his stance was different, stiff, alert, sensing something not merely about Ethan, but about the ground itself. He shifted his weight repeatedly, ears angling toward a section of the slope behind the rescue team. Cole Ramirez knelt beside the opening with oxygen tubing and a portable compressor. O2 saturation down there is low, he warned. Too low. We have to pump air down before Andrew can reach him. Andrew, still strapped to his harness, leaned over the rope line. He looked like a man hollowed out by fear and fury, shaking with the need to act. Then pump it faster. He's fading. I can feel it. Sheriff Mira Dalton stepped between him and the shaft, steady but firm. We are moving as fast as we can without killing you both. Her stern voice cut through the noise. Andrew looked away, chest heaving. Laura arrived at the staging area with a handheld radio pressed tight in her hands. Her face was splotchy from crying, but her posture, back straight, shoulders squared, was stronger than it had been in months. She had taken command of communications, relaying updates between the ground crew, search volunteers, and the EMTs waiting along the trail. Even the rescue workers seemed surprised to see her so focused, so composed. An older woman from town, Marjorie Keene, placed a blanket around Laura's shoulders. Marjorie was in her late 60s, silver-haired, short and round with a face as soft as her knitted cardigans. She ran Pinehollow's general store and had always adored Ethan, though she'd once scolded him for climbing the shelves like a squirrel. Tonight, she hovered near Laura like a protective grandmother. "Oh, sweetheart," Marjorie murmured, squeezing Laura's arm. "He's a tough boy. He's got those dogs of yours watching him. He'll hold on." Laura gave a small, shaking nod. "He has to." Behind them, more residents appeared. Mechanics, teachers, hikers, even tourists from the lakeside cabins. People brought blankets, hot drinks, backup lights, even their own tools. Many wore guilt on their faces. They remembered every time they'd scolded Ethan for exploring too far, every time they'd called him reckless. Now they stayed because leaving felt like betrayal. Blitz suddenly barked sharply, drawing everyone's attention. She darted away from the drill team and toward a rocky section of slope near an uprooted pine. Ranger followed, nose low, tail stiff. Mira frowned. "What now?" Blitz scraped at the earth with fast, frantic strokes. Ranger joined her, digging with slower but deeper movements. Within seconds, they exposed something buried beneath a thin layer of soil, thick plastic, torn at the edges. And beneath that plastic, paper, binders, rusted metal clips. Cole hustled over. "What is that?" Andrew pulled the sheet away. Blueprints, survey maps, soil analysis forms, all marked with the Morton Geotech logo. Caleb Morton froze when he saw them, his face draining of color until he looked ghostly under the rescue lights. Mira strode toward him, her boots crunching over the debris. "Morton, explain." Caleb opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. His throat bobbed. Sweat slicked his brow despite the cold air. I don't know what those are doing here," Ranger growled, a deep rumble of mistrust. Mira crossed her arms. "I'm only going to ask once. Why are risk assessment documents for this ridge buried under a landslide?" Caleb swallowed hard. Because it wasn't supposed to matter." "Not supposed to matter," Andrew stepped in, his voice shaking with rage. "My son is dying under your ridge." Caleb backed away, hands raised. "Listen, I didn't falsify anything. I just simplified it. Explain, Mira commanded. Caleb wiped his mouth with shaking fingers. The council wouldn't approve funding for the Pine Ridge tourism project unless the land looked stable. So, yes, I streamlined some of the warnings, removed irrelevant data, consolidated reports so they wouldn't scare off investors. The underground cavities didn't seem active anymore. The old forestry tunnels were sealed decades ago. Or should have been. Mira's voice went dangerously quiet. You buried the red flags. I thought it was safe, Caleb cried. We all did, Blitz snarled, a sound she had never used except when confronting real danger. Ranger abruptly stepped toward the ridge wall, ears forward. He pawed once at a thin overhang of limestone, then froze, body rigid. Cole looked up. Sheriff, he's signaling something. Ranger stepped back, staring intensely at the stone above the shaft where Andrew was preparing to descend. Cole approached the wall and placed a hand against it. A low groan vibrated through the rock. Then a thin fracture snaked across the limestone, shedding dust onto his boots. Oh no, Cole whispered. Mira spun toward the team. Everyone back from the rock face! The top of the slope cracked again, this time louder. Pebbles rained down. A chunk of rock detached and rolled violently toward the shaft entrance, missing Blitz by inches. Laura gripped Marjorie's arm. What's happening? Cole shouted. The upper layer is giving way. If water from the storm runoff breaks through, Andrew finished for him. It'll flood the chamber Ethan's in. The realization rippled across the group like a wave of ice. Blitz bolted to the shaft and barked frantically into the hole, her paws scraping the rock, urging Ethan to stay awake. Ranger pressed his body against Andrew again, steadying him. The drill team scrambled to reinforce the opening, wedging steel supports beneath the overhang. Cole leaned over the monitor where Ethan's faint image flickered in blue light. The boy's head had drooped, his chest barely moved. We're running out of time, Cole murmured. He can't afford even one more shift in the rock. Mira turned to Laura. We need you at the radio. Tell the EMTs to prepare for immediate extraction. And tell the council we just uncovered evidence that Morton's company concealed geological hazards. Get every available backup sent here. Laura, hands trembling but steadying with each breath, nodded. I can do that. She stood taller than she had in months. Blitz nosed the shaft again, whining. The air rising from it smelled even worse now. Thicker, hotter, tinged with minerals and danger. She could sense Ethan slipping. Ranger returned to the hidden documents and sniffed the broken binders, as though memorizing the scent of corruption. Then he looked to Mira with a sound halfway between a growl and a plea. The truth was out. Ethan had only hours, and the mountain itself was turning against them. The rescue had become a race not only against time, but against the lies buried beneath Pinehollow's soil. The cracking above the ridge became a roar, a grinding thunder that made every rescuer freeze. Dust and small stones rained downward, and the entire wall of limestone trembled. Blitz reacted first. Her hackles lifted, a sharp warning bark cutting through the chaos. Then, without waiting for a command she knew would come too late, the young shepherd lunged into the unfinished access tunnel. Andrew shouted after her, but Blitz had already vanished into the half-meter opening the drill team had carved. Ranger sprinted behind her, heavier and more experienced, but just as driven. The rescuers yelled for restraints, ropes, anything, but nothing could stop trained K-9s when their handler's child was dying below. Sheriff Mira Dalton cursed under her breath and signaled the drill team to halt operations. Sparks died instantly. She was breathing fast, but her command stayed crisp. Stabilize the ropes, clear the lower anchoring line. Now, if those dogs open space, we follow them. Inside the narrow passage, Blitz slid on loose gravel and limestone fragments, but her body moved like liquid. Low, fast, determined. The tunnel angled downward in a jagged slope, then pinched into a tighter squeeze where fresh rock had collapsed moments earlier. She shoved her shoulders in without hesitation, claws scraping for purchase. Ranger arrived behind her, panting hard. Unlike Blitz's slender, agile frame, Ranger's build was broader, solid muscle from 6 years of service. His coat was darker, his muzzle graying. The squeeze was almost too tight for him, but he forced his way in, bracing his back against the stone to keep the passage from shifting further. The strain made his claws shriek against the rock. Behind them, the world growled again. More rock shifting, more dust pouring down. Blitz pushed through the narrowest point and tumbled into the upper section of the collapsed forestry bunker. Her paws landed on loose debris. The air was thick, hot, metallic, wrong. Her ears flattened. She barked into the dark. Below her, barely visible under the dim shaft of light from the rescue camera, was Ethan. The boy was crumpled near the far end of the chamber, one arm limp against his chest. The bandage he'd fashioned for himself was soaked. His breaths came in thin, uneven gasps. His face was smudged with dirt, pale beneath it. His fingers twitched weakly toward the sound of Blitz's bark. He was still conscious, barely, but still there. Blitz scrambled down the slanted debris, small stones sliding under her paws. Ethan's eyes flickered open a sliver. When he saw her silhouette, he made a frail sound, half relief, half sob. Blitz? She crawled over him and lay across his chest, her lighter body forming a protective shield as a tremor shook dust from the ceiling. Ranger slid in behind her just as another slab cracked loose. He pressed his side into the falling debris, shouldering rocks aside with a grunt that echoed off the walls. Several stones bounced off Blitz's back, but she didn't move. Ranger dragged his body along the ground to reach Ethan's legs. With careful, deliberate movement, he caught Ethan's pant leg in his teeth, not to harm, but to pull him away from the spot where the toxic air pooled thickest. He tugged inch by inch, shifting Ethan toward the slope where fresher oxygen seeped in. Above ground, Andrew felt the tug through the rope affixed to the boy's belt. His knees buckled. "They found him! They've got him! Oh God! Ethan!" Cole Ramirez checked the tension. "Movement detected! Something's pulling him toward the west wall." "That's Ranger," Andrew said hoarsely. "That's Ranger doing what he was trained to do." The drill team didn't wait for further orders. Using crowbars and hydraulic spreaders, they widened the opening enough for a rescue bucket. One rescuer waited at the lip, Jordan Pike, a 32-year-old EMT with short, sandy hair and a calm, level-headed confidence. He wasn't large, but compact and strong, with quick hands and a measured voice that had steadied countless victims. Jordan clipped his harness to the overhead pulley. "Lower me in. Get ready for all 3, kid and both dogs." Mira nodded sharply. "Go." Inside the bunker, Ranger had positioned himself above Ethan's body, one front paw shaking from strain. Blitz stayed pressed to Ethan's torso, her breaths rapid and shallow. She didn't care about the dust or the falling stones. Her job was to keep his chest shielded. Ethan's voice trembled. "I'm sorry, Dad, I didn't mean—" Blitz licked his chin once, urging him to stay awake. Ranger nosed his cheek, a low rumble vibrating through the boy's ribs. Then rope lines dropped into the chamber. A faint glow from Jordan's headlamp cut through the haze. "I see them," he called upward. Andrew collapsed to the ground, sobbing. Jordan crouched beside Ethan and immediately assessed the boy's pulse with 2 fingers on his neck. Weak, but present, he turned to Ranger and Blitz. "Good dogs, hold on." He secured a harness loop beneath Ethan's arms, working fast but gently. Blitz refused to move until Jordan physically shifted her aside, and even then, she stayed so close she touched Ethan's shoulder. Ranger gave a short warning bark as another quake rippled through the bunker. "Get them out!" Jordan yelled. Above ground, the rescue crew pulled. The rope tightened. Ethan rose slowly, inch by inch, as Ranger nudged from below, helping guide his ascent. Blitz scrambled up beside Ethan, refusing to be separated. Her claws clicked loudly against the rock. When Ethan finally reached the opening, Andrew's arms were already there. He grabbed his son and pulled him to his chest, cradling the shaking boy against him. "I'm sorry," Andrew cried. "I'm so sorry, buddy." Ethan tried to speak, but only let out a weak sound as he pressed his face into his father's collar. Laura fell to her knees and wrapped her arms around Blitz, holding the dog like a child, whispering into her fur. Blitz whimpered softly, burying her nose into Laura's shoulder as if exhausted beyond measure. Then Ranger emerged, but the moment he reached the lip of the hole, his back leg buckled. He stumbled, collapsing onto his side. "Ranger!" Ethan cried weakly. Cole rushed forward. Ranger's right hind leg was twisted unnaturally, his fur torn and blood glistening. The veteran K9 let out a low whine, but didn't snap or resist as Cole stabilized the limb. His dark eyes searched for Ethan, and only relaxed when he saw the boy safe in Andrew's arms. Mira's voice suddenly cut through the emotional surge. "Everyone back! The ridge is failing!" Before anyone could move, the bunker gave a final groan, a deep, cavernous roar, and the entire section of ground behind them collapsed inward. The tunnel, the chamber, the ropes, everything vanished in a violent rush of dust and falling stone. Had they been 30 seconds later, all of them, Ethan, Ranger, Blitz, Jordan, would have been swallowed whole. Silence fell over the ridge, except for the wind and Ethan's soft, frightened sobs. Andrew held him tighter, rocking gently. Laura clung to Blitz. Cole wrapped gauze around Ranger's leg as the dog weakly pressed his muzzle into Ethan's arm. The rescue was over. They had won, but just barely. The morning after the collapse, Pinehollow woke to a quiet that felt sacred. Mist curled between the fir trees, drifting over the emergency tents and rescue vehicles still stationed at the base of Pine Ridge. For the first time in 30 hours, there was no drilling, no shouting, no cracking rock. Only soft footfalls, hushed conversations, and the steady beeps of medical monitors inside the EMT shelter where Ethan Walker slept. Ethan lay curled beneath a thick silver blanket, his right arm secured in a sling. His face was still pale, smudged lightly with dried dirt the nurses hadn't fully scrubbed away yet. But the rise and fall of his breathing was steady, peaceful, alive. Beside the cot, Blitz rested with her chin on the edge of the mattress. Her coat, once dulled with dust and debris, had been brushed clean by volunteers. Her amber eyes stayed locked on Ethan's face as though it were her new full-time assignment. Ranger lay a few feet away, his injured hind leg wrapped in several layers of bandages and supported by a soft brace. A large ice pack rested over the swelling. The older shepherd's breathing was slower, heavier, but his tail thumped weakly each time Ethan shifted. Andrew Walker stood at the entrance of the tent. The man had barely slept. Exhaustion clung to him like soot. His rugged face, usually marked by stubble and outdoorsman confidence, looked softer now, almost boyish, as though the fear had peeled away every layer of pride. A deep guilt still lived behind his tired eyes. Laura stood beside him. Her posture had changed, stronger, more grounded, as if the ordeal had forced something dormant inside her to awaken. Her long chestnut hair was tied back messily, and her face still carried the traces of someone who had fought months of depression. Yet this morning, she looked present, awake, whole. A doctor approached them. Dr. Hannah Pierce, early 50s, tall and willow-slender, with sharp silver-rimmed glasses and a voice that always sounded on the verge of gentle laughter. She had spent 20 years practicing emergency medicine in rural Colorado and carried the calm confidence of someone who had seen everything. "He'll be all right," Dr. Pierce said quietly. "The fracture in his arm is clean. The oxygen deprivation was concerning, but we caught it in time. He's dehydrated, but kids bounce back fast." Laura covered her mouth with both hands. Tears spilled instantly. Andrew put an arm around her shoulders, pulling her toward him. "And Ranger?" Andrew asked. "Slower recovery," Dr. Pierce admitted, "but promising. No internal bleeding, just a deep tissue injury and a partial ligament tear. He'll need weeks of rest." Ranger huffed as if annoyed by the very concept of rest. Blitz gave him a corrective bark, earning a weak tail wag. As Laura stepped inside the tent and cupped Blitz's face with trembling hands, the young shepherd leaned into her touch. Laura's voice cracked. "You saved him. You both saved him." Blitz exhaled softly, settling her weight against Laura's legs, as though aware she'd become something more than just a family dog last night. Outside, reporters and curious townspeople began gathering. Pinehollow was a small mountain community, but word of the rescue had spread fast. People brought flowers. Children held handmade signs reading "Thank you, Ranger," and "Blitz, the hero." Sheriff Mira Dalton arrived at the camp shortly after sunrise. Mira looked different from the night before. Rested, hair pulled back in a clean braid, uniform freshly pressed. But there was a shadow under her eyes, a mark left by leadership under chaos. She walked with a steady determination. Beside her stood a deputy escorting Caleb Morton in handcuffs. Morton looked nothing like the confident contractor from 2 days earlier. His clothes were dust-stained, and his hair hung limp over his forehead. He wouldn't meet Mira's gaze. Mira addressed the crowd. "Caleb Morton has been formally arrested on charges of falsifying geological reports, criminal negligence, and reckless endangerment. Because of his actions, the land beneath Pine Ridge was never properly surveyed. Multiple sinkholes have already been found. More will be investigated." Murmurs spread. Shock, anger, relief. Morton finally lifted his head. His voice trembled. I never meant for this." Mira's answer was cold, but not cruel. "Intentions don't change consequences." He was placed in a cruiser and driven away slowly through the sea of onlookers. By midday, Ethan was stable enough to be moved. Laura and Andrew lifted him carefully into a wheelchair. Blitz trotted beside them, tail high. Ranger, still limping, leaned gently against Andrew for support. When the family emerged from the tent, the crowd erupted in applause. Ethan blinked, startled. "Mom, what's happening?" Laura knelt, brushing his hair off his forehead. "Everyone's here because you held on, because you didn't give up." Mira stepped forward. She carried a small wooden box. Inside lay a bronze medal with an indented pine tree and a mountain ridge. "Ethan Walker," she announced, "in recognition of your courage, resilience, and determination." Pinehollow presents you with the Survival Bravery Medal. The crowd cheered. Ethan stared at the medal wide-eyed. For me? Andrew swallowed hard. You fought, Ethan. You stayed alive. That makes you brave. Next, Mira kneeled before Blitz and Ranger. And these two, she smiled, wiping dust from Ranger's fur. These two are now honorary members of Pinehollow Search and Rescue. A tiny vest, bright red with reflective stripes, was fastened gently onto Blitz's shoulders. It read, Honorary Rescue Dog, Blitz. Ranger received his own vest as well, though sized larger and with a paw print insignia stitched over the front. Children rushed forward with flowers to place around the dogs. Blitz accepted the flowers, carefully, tail wagging so hard her whole body swayed. Ranger leaned his head into Ethan's lap for comfort. In the following weeks, Pine Ridge underwent a full geological reassessment. Teams discovered 3 additional unstable caverns beneath popular trails. Without Ethan's accident, those areas might have collapsed under hikers or campers. Pinehollow installed new barriers, warning signs, and stabilized the ridge. Caleb Morton's trial became front-page news across the county. He was convicted on multiple charges, but for the Walker family, healing mattered more than headlines. Laura returned to therapy, but now with a different light in her eyes. The crisis had jolted her awake, reminding her she could lose more than she already had. Andrew attended family sessions with her, his guilt transformed into a fierce determination to be a better father. And Ethan, freckle-faced, stronger than before, began training with the local Ranger Cadet program. Wearing his tiny green vest labeled Junior Ranger, he practiced identifying animal tracks, learned how to navigate trails, and took first aid classes for kids. Ranger and Blitz became regulars at Pinehollow Elementary, where they were part of a trauma comfort initiative supported by the Sheriff's Department. Students who struggled with anxiety or difficult home lives spent time with the two shepherds. Blitz was the playful distraction, the soft, warm presence who coaxed smiles out of even the quietest children. Ranger was the steady one, the gentle guardian who sat still and let kids rest against him, grounding them like a living anchor. But even as life returned to normal, Ethan made a habit of visiting the old trail leading to the sealed shaft. The entrance was now reinforced and fenced, warning signs bolted in place. But Ethan always stepped up to the stone marker he had helped carve. A smooth pebble rested at its base, etched with small, shaky handwriting. Thank you for not leaving me. One for Blitz, one for Ranger, one for Hope. On a warm afternoon 2 months after the rescue, Pinehollow unveiled a bronze sculpture at the forest entrance. The two shepherds standing alert, one poised forward, one braced protectively behind. Between them, a small figure, Ethan, etched in bronze reaching upward toward the light. Ethan clutched Blitz as the cloth fell away. Ranger sat tall, chest out, as if he understood the honor. Andrew wrapped an arm around Laura's shoulders. We're okay, he whispered. Finally, we're okay. Laura rested her head against him, watching their son run his fingers along the bronze with a smile bright enough to outshine the afternoon sun. Pinehollow had its miracle, and the Walkers had their light back. In the end, Pinehollow's miracle wasn't just about a brave boy and 2 loyal dogs. It was a reminder of something we often forget in the rush of everyday life. That even in our darkest moments, hope can still find a way to breathe. That love can cross every boundary, even between species. And that sometimes the smallest voices, the quietest instincts, the gentlest acts of courage are the ones that save us. Maybe this story touches your heart because you see a part of yourself in it, the moments when you felt lost, afraid, or unheard, the times you wished someone would come for you, or the times you had to be brave for someone else. Let this be a reminder for your own journey to listen more deeply, to love more fiercely, and to believe that healing is always possible, no matter how broken things once were. If this story moved you even a little, I invite you to share it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment to tell us what moment touched you the most. If you feel grateful for the protection, love, and miracles in your life, comment Amen below. And if you would like more stories of courage, compassion, and faith, please subscribe to the channel. May God bless you, your family, and everyone who carries both light and struggle in their hearts. Amen.